The email came at 9:17 a.m., 1 minute after I'd refilled my mug with the office's burnt coffee, and 2 minutes after I'd sat down feeling oddly hopeful about the morning. Subject: organizational update. In another universe, it would have been the one that finally recognized my work, the dashboards I'd built that doubled the speed of our routing decisions, the triage I'd done after the Memorial Day outage, the quiet Saturdays I'd spent prodding data that didn't want to reveal what it knew. In this universe, I clicked and read the 6 lines my boss, Martin, had arranged like polite bullets pointed at my ribs. We're restructuring product. As part of our commitment to fresh perspectives, we're bringing in a new product manager who will oversee core workflow. Effective immediately, your role will be redefined as analyst at large, reporting to the new PM. Please transition all projects by Friday. I blinked. My inbox swam. Beneath the signature, Best Martin, was a note about the new PM's onboarding lunch. Her name, Avery, and her last name, also Martin, his niece. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling tiles, their speckled faux constellations. I'd always imagined I'd leave Halberd Logistics by choice, for a job at a company where product meant more than interface for the sales team's promises. I hadn't imagined being demoted into a new species of assistant, so that Martin could pretend nepotism was succession. The hum of the office had the soothing emptiness of a near-empty plane, soft, contained, uncaring. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the river sliced cleanly by the wind. Chicago in early fall is a secret. If you squint, you can believe winter will never come. That morning, the city looked like a promise I didn't know how to keep to myself. Hey, Ria. Nadia, the QA lead, stopped by my desk holding a stack of bug reports like a fan. You see this? Yeah, I said, right before the first laugh scraped out of me. It startled us both. I saw. Nadia's mouth made the shape of sympathy, and then shut again. We'd both been here long enough to know which kinds of conversations were safe, and which could be forwarded. I've got your regression list, I said, practical because I was young and still believed practicality was armor. I'll send it to, I swallowed. The new PM. Sure, Nadia said. She squeezed my shoulder once, so brief it might have been accidental. You're still the one who knows where the bodies are buried. I prefer where the servers are sulking, I said. It took only a day for Avery to materialize. She arrived at the onboarding lunch in a Lislime blazer and shoes that clicked like a metronome. She was my age or a year older, maybe 25, hair that expensive copper you can't inherit. Martin introduced her as brilliant, a breath of fresh air, and hungry. She introduced herself as someone who loved UX and was obsessed with the customer journey, which would have been less alarming if she hadn't pronounced journey like a hotel chain. At the end of the lunch, Martin pulled me aside. You get this, right? His hand was on my elbow like he might steer me into traffic if I didn't. It's time for you to expand, to get out of the weeds. I like the weeds, I said. That's where the bugs hide. That's a good line, he said without hearing it. Mentor Avery. Help her get the context. You two are going to be a power team. For 2 weeks I tried to be good. I met Avery at 8 a.m. with the dashboards already loaded. I showed her how the split function logic was fragile around end-of-month reconciliations. How our freight estimates were off by 6% on routes with more than 3 handoffs. How the driver's app was missing a permission toggle that meant if you installed it without admin rights you had to reinstall after every update. She nodded and took pictures of the screens with her phone. Sometimes she called me honey, and sometimes girl, and sometimes she forwarded my emails to Martin with small corrections to my grammar. The first time she presented, she put Halberd's AI strategy on a slide with a stock photo of a circuit board. Then she looked at me like I was a helpful exception handler and said, Ria will speak to the tactical bits. We weren't doing AI. We were barely doing math that deserved its degree. I walked to the front, took a breath, and turned her title into something that would not invite litigation. Strategy. Yes. Let's call it, make fewer dumb mistakes in routing. My mother called that night. Your aunt saw a girl on Instagram wearing a blazer the color of toothpaste, she said without greeting me. This is how comfort arrived in our house. Are people wearing toothpaste now? Frequently, I said. In tech, we believe in dental hygiene. Are you okay? I'm fine. The word didn't land anywhere. My boss hired his niece. Ah, she said, and it contained enough words to warm me. Nepotism is like saffron. A little okay. Too much, and the biryani tastes like perfume. I'll put that in my Q3 review. You put it in your plan, she said. You're 24. People will keep underestimating you. Use it. Take their money and build your own thing. I laughed again, softer this time. My own what? You'll figure it out, she said simply. You always have. It didn't happen as a montage. There was no swelling music or neat sequence of coffee cups drained as I typed code, so clean it purred. There were 100 acts of small audacity. I started with a spreadsheet that became a script, that became an experiment in a private repo. I knew a truth I hadn't known I'd learned. Small carriers hate paying for software they can't control, but they love saving 30 minutes per route. They hate enterprise contracts, but they'll pay a monthly fee if you fix the way the load sheets get lost between dispatch and dock. They don't want AI. They want their Tuesday to stop bleeding into their Wednesday. At Halberd, Avery launched a redesign that added teal gradients to buttons and removed the only shortcut the drivers used. Support tickets doubled. Martin sent a company-wide email about growth pains. I offered a fix and was told to focus on internal projects. So at night I focused on something that had no name and felt like a secret. The name came after a Saturday spent with my friend Zoya at the library. She was a designer with an illustrator's brain and a tendency to narrate her sketching. You need a name that sounds like a spark, she said. Light, fast, slightly dangerous. What about Matchstick? Matchstick, I repeated and felt something settle in my ribs. Matchstick it is. It took 4 months to build the first version. A lightweight tool that sat on top of whatever system small carriers used. A tangle of PDFs, emails, and a scheduling site from 2007, and stitched documents into a single view with alerts you couldn't ignore. It was dumb on purpose. Rules instead of models, flags instead of forecasts. It sent one text when a driver forgot to sign a bill of lading, not 17 emails after the damage was done. Zoya made it look like an app you'd trust at 2 in the morning when a pallet collapsed. My friend Marcos, who I'd met in a Python meetup where the snacks outnumbered the women, hooked the messaging into an SMS integration that didn't cost more than my rent. We split equity the way friends do when they're broke and believing, 60-25-15, with a clause that said if any of us quit before a year, we'd return half our shares. We wrote it on a napkin, then put it into a doc, then paid a lawyer $400 to tell us the doc was better than the napkin but not by much. Our first customer was a man named Dave who ran a 3-truck operation out of Joliet. I found him on a forum at midnight, posted about what we were building, and he messaged me at 12:07. Can this stop my guys from forgetting to report accidents until Thursday? I replied, it can't stop them, but it can call them every 10 minutes until they do. Dave said, that's better than my ex-wife. We charged him $59 a month, and then increased it to $99 after he told me it saved him 2 missed loads in the first week. He didn't blink. I learned a thing no job had taught me. If you fix a pain so basic it feels like breathing freely after a cold, people will give you money and tell you to take more as long as you keep the air moving. Meanwhile at Halberd, the niece who had a title continued to speak about storytelling, while the product told on itself. Drivers deleted the app from their phones. The ops team reverted to spreadsheets. Martin doubled down on the words vision, North Star, and innovation. He used them like duct tape across a leak. The end came not with a firing but with a sigh. In our one-on-one, Martin looked tired in a way I'd never seen. He opened a folder with my name on it and slid a paper across to me. Redefinition wasn't the right word, he said. We're eliminating redundancies. He said it like he was reading from a card. We appreciate your contribution and will provide a severance that's competitive. I stared at the paper. The number wasn't insulting. For a second, my mouth tried to form the words I had practiced in my head for months. You're making a mistake, but another sentence bulldozed through. Thank you. I took the check, walked out with my plant and a mug that said shipping happens, waved at Nadia, and walked into a fall afternoon so crisp it almost hurt. On the train to my studio, I texted my mother. It happened. She replied, take a deep breath, buy yourself a cinnamon roll, and start your company on Monday. On Monday, I bought a pass to a co-working space with sticky tables and high windows. I put Matchstick on a server stable enough to withstand my panic. I emailed Dave and asked if he knew any carriers who might want to be in a founder's circle and get discounts in exchange for telling me what was broken. He sent 12 names. 4 of them replied. 2 paid. Then 6. Then 10. The chart that mattered, customers who paid me to keep their Tuesdays tidy, climbed like a patient hill. The first time something truly broke, it was 2:18 a.m., and my phone began to vibrate with an urgency it had never known. A loop had looped too hard. Matchstick sent the same alert to the same driver 67 times before he threw his phone at a wall. Dave called me swearing in capital letters. I joined a call with him, Zoya, and Marcos. I apologized. I apologized again. Then I fixed the loop, patched the code, pushed it live, and texted the driver myself to say, I'm the idiot who built the thing that killed your sleep. I'm sorry. We comped a month. The driver replied with an emoji that looked like forgiveness. I slept for 20 minutes and then went to the co-working space with a bag of bagels big enough to be a policy. I learned that sometimes leadership is a stack of carbs and a clear admission of fault. When we had 30 customers, I applied to Forge Labs, an accelerator that had funded 2 companies I admired so much I had stolen from them, and called it Taste. I pitched in a room with sneakers that had opinions and laptops that had stickers. I told them I wasn't building an AI revolution. I was building a fix to the stupidest pain in logistics, forgetting. I showed them a slide that said, we make forgetting expensive and remembering cheap. Then I shut up and waited. We got in. The 3 months that followed were a tunnel. It smelled like coffee, panic, and progress. I learned to talk to investors without apologizing for being 25. I learned to say we, even when I meant I, because I was learning to be we. We closed a pre-seed. We hired a part-time support person named Renee, who was so good at being kind that I copied her email phrasing for my personal life. We doubled our customers. At demo day, I wore a blue blazer that my mother insisted on buying and, on stage, felt the silvery tingle of a future cracking open. The first whisper about Halberd reached me through a group chat I had muted. Nadia texted, guess who cut 10% of the ops team to pay for a brand refresh? I wrote, I'm sending them a candle. She wrote back, send a Matchstick, CEO. I stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering over a reply that felt like gloating, then typed, you okay? She sent a shrug emoji and then, I will be proud of you. The second whisper was louder. An article in a local business blog about turbulence at a once steady logistics SaaS. I didn't click. I didn't need to see the photos of open laptops blurred in the background and quotes anonymized into wax. I was busy not breaking my own company. When Matchstick hit $1 million in ARR, I took my mother to dinner at the kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices or vowels. She ordered a fish brave enough to meet us. I ordered a steak that had lived well. I told her about the board I was assembling and the options we were granting ourselves because I wanted the life a corporate handbook would never allow. Fairness that felt like math, not mercy. Good, she said. Remember to pay yourself enough to sleep. Enough to sleep? Money is a duvet, she said. Not a trophy. We grew. Not straight lines, curves that looked like a heart rate. Up in sprints, treading in plateaus, cresting and dipping. Zoya created a notification system I wanted to croon to when I was drunk. Marcos refactored a piece of code that had become a Jenga tower into something that made other developers nod resonantly. Renee turned renewal into a ritual. Whenever I got scared, I went to a customer's warehouse and watched a driver sign something correctly the first time because Matchstick had made the line impossible to miss. I thought, we did that. I thought, this is art. 2 years after I left Halberd, an email arrived that made my throat go dry. The subject line said, Inquiry Re, Strategic Investment. It was from a consultant named Priya representing a client she didn't name in the subject, but did in the body. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th. I stood up, walked to the kitchen in the office we finally had, poured water into a plant we called Kevin, and then sat down again. The client was Halberd Logistics. They were looking to raise a significant round to restructure and refocus after a competitive landscape shift. They had heard of Matchstick through a customer who used both products. They were exploring partnership synergies and wanted to know if I'd be open to a conversation, either as a partner or as an investor through the syndicate I had recently begun to participate in with other founders. Why you? Zoya asked when I told her, half whispering, half laughing, in the kitchen over a bowl of almonds no one ever voluntarily eats. Because I know their code, their market, and their mess, I said. Because I might be the only idiot who says yes. You're not an idiot, Zoya said. But if you are, be a beautiful one. Protect yourself. Protect myself. I called Marcos, who had turned out to be my best reader of risk. He said, 2 options. You engage purely as a partner and keep Matchstick at a safe distance. Or you go in as an investor with terms that allow you to fix them. No mush. Mush is how people drown. I hate mush, I said, rubbing my eyebrow the way I do when I'm assembling a thought. Priya and I met at a cafe with plants that looked like they had equity. She was calm in the way of people who know numbers, so well they can forgive them. She slid a folder across the table and said, This is not a pitch deck. It's a confession. Inside, churn curves that had iced into cliff faces, support tickets that bloomed like algae, cash runway so short it wore sneakers. And then appended a slide about brand vision, a collage of teal gradients. Who's running product? I asked, too mildly to be congratulated. Avery, Priya said, and the sympathy that crossed her face was like a candle in a power outage. The founder's niece. I know, I said. I used to report to her. Ah, she said, and unlike the first time I'd heard that syllable in this story, this one was a door opening. We talked for an hour. Priya didn't pretend they weren't flailing. She offered ownership to the facts. She asked me what governance would make me comfortable participating in a syndicate that would invest the amount they needed to not die. The word comfortable lodged in my teeth. This had been my life's thesis for 2 years. Discomfort is the soil. But comfort can be governance when you're talking about putting money into a thing that once told you you were optional. I'd need the power to change leadership, I said, surprising myself with how flatly it came out. If I'm going to participate, the board needs to be reconstituted. Independent seat with real teeth. And a clause that triggers if key metrics miss for 2 quarters. You want to fire Martin and Avery, Priya said. It wasn't a question. It was a translation. I want Halberd to live, I said. They're in the way. Will you tell them that, she asked. Or shall I? I'll tell them, I said, and felt the strange hot-cold wash of a thing that has become inevitable. We set the meeting 2 weeks later. I wore a navy suit that could have been a shield. I arrived 10 minutes early and walked around the block twice. The building was the same. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon and the magazine no one reads. When I stepped into the elevator, my hands remembered the motion of pressing 8, and then 3 because the button for 8 stuck. The conference room had not changed. The whiteboard still had a stain shaped like Nebraska. Martin sat at the head of the table, pink in the face in a way that used to mean he was pleased and now meant he was cornered. Avery was at his right, scrolling through a deck on a laptop festooned with stickers that told me what she wanted to be boldly and what she was quietly. Rhea, Martin said. His voice carried that brittle brightness of someone trying to cut a ribbon on a bridge that ends at the river. Look at you. I sat down, placed my notebook on the table like a card with an edge, and said, We don't need to pretend this is anything else. Let's talk about what Halberd needs and what we're willing to do to give it to you. Avery cleared her throat. We're not here to be told what to do, she said. We're here because we're open to collaboration. I met her eyes. Collaboration implies symmetry, I said. You're running out of runway. We're offering an airstrip. Martin bristled. You're very young to talk about runways. So are you to crash a plane? I said, and then apologized in the smallest movement, a tilt of my chin, a breath pulled back. I'll be direct. The syndicate I'm part of is interested. We believe the underlying market is strong. We believe your brand, despite the teal, has value. We believe your customers want to stay if you give them a reason. We also believe leadership has made strategic errors. If we invest, we require two things: a reconstituted board with an independent seat controlled by the syndicate and immediate changes to executive leadership, CEO and head of product. Silence as the word immediate unspooled in the room. And who do you propose to install? Martin asked at last, voice like a polished desk. An interim CEO from your own team, I said. Priya if she accepts. And an interim head of product chosen by the board, someone from operations who knows the floor. I have a name in mind. Ishan. I looked at him then, where he sat halfway down the table like a man who had snuck into his own life. Ishan had been the ops lead who used to send me emails at 2 a.m. saying, if we move this tab to the left, the drivers will stop ignoring it. He had been ignored. He was not made of adjectives. He was made of stubbornness. Avery laughed, a quick exhale as if I'd told a joke that did not understand itself. You think you can come in here after, 2 years and unseat the people who built this? I think the people who built this are tired of bleeding, I said gently. I think they're ready for choices that don't require explaining why the app forgot how to save. Martin looked at Priya. Priya looked at the deck. The deck looked at no one. This is outrageous, Martin said finally. You're a child. I'm 26, I said. Old enough to demand terms and young enough to stay up while we fix the mess. He stood again. If anger had a choreography, he was not a lithe dancer. We brought you here out of courtesy. No, Priya put in, voice soft as a stethoscope. We brought her here because we need money. Avery's mouth opened and closed. She looked at Martin, then at me, and for a second I saw the human under the niece. Someone who had been thrown into a room and told to be brilliant without being taught how to be good. I felt something like pity, not because she was undone, but because she had never been allowed to build anything that would hold her. Give us a day, Martin said, the words dragged out of him like a tooth. You have 48 hours, I said, because a day for a man like him would expand to a week if I let it. Then the syndicate moves on. There are other places to land planes. The call came sooner than I expected. Priya, they accept. The terms as drafted. Board reconstitution. Interim leadership. Close in 30 days. We closed in 28. The documents were a forest of words. My lawyer rejoiced as only a person who loves trees enough to read every ring can rejoice. I signed with a pen I had bought on a whim from a bookstore because it felt like a wand. Marcos sent a gif of matchsticks flaring and dying and flaring again. The first board meeting of the new halberd was held in that same room, stained still shaped like Nebraska. I wore a gray dress that made me look like someone's favorite professor. Priya sat at the head of the table with a stack of notes and a glass of water she would not drink. Ishan sat at her left, trying not to look like he was about to be asked to run across a bridge he had never seen before. Martin and Avery were at the far end, their phones face down as if that could make them art. We ran through the numbers, then through the plan. Reduce churn by focusing on the features customers actually used. Kill the teal. Reset the sales quotas to something non-delusional. Rebuild the driver app with a small, ugly team that knew what a driver's hands felt like at 5 a.m. Then we came to the part of the agenda. It reads like a life-saving surgery, Priya said, and her steady gaze made the air less thick. The patient will live. I raised my hand. The syndicate moves that we enact the executive transition as written, effective today, I said. Remove Martin as CEO and Avery as head of product. Install Priya as interim CEO. Install Ishan as interim head of product. Begin the search for permanent leadership in both roles. Provide severance in line with policy. Avery looked at me the way you look at someone who reminds you that the world is not fair. You're loving this, she said quietly. I met her eyes. No, I said. I'm finishing it. The vote was called. The ice were a chorus softer than satisfaction. They were relief in a minor key. When it was done, Martin stood almost graceful. He nodded at Priya. He did not look at me. Avery remained seated for a beat too long, as if her chair had become a story she couldn't figure out how to get out of. After, I went to the roof. Chicago in late spring is a dare. The wind makes you believe in winter the way a scar makes you believe in pain. I stood there with my hands on the cool stone and thought about a line from a book my mother used to read to me. Tell the truth and shame the devil. I had told the truth. They were not the ones to lead Halberd to the part of the map where the sea dragons end. I had shamed no devils, only removed 2 people from jobs they were not doing. I didn't think you'd actually do it, Ishan said behind me, as if I had fired the moon. He stood with the careful posture of a man who has been promoted and is afraid of tipping. You'll do it now, I said. Not the firing, the fixing. He blew out a breath that could have been a prayer. I will. Build the thing the ops team has been asking for since 2019. Start small and dumb. Ship it fast and ugly. Ask drivers to break it. Take them to lunch. I'll sit in on your stand-ups for a month, and then I'll get out of your way. Halberd isn't my company. You could have bought us, he said. I didn't want to own you, I said. I wanted you to live. We lived in the knots for a while, the messy months when change feels like fever. Halberd cut features and found focus. They talked to customers who had almost left and asked them what would keep them here. They killed the gradients and built a screen that a driver could read in the cab of a truck on a road levitating heat. They paid down support debt, like it was a mortgage they wanted to see the back of. I invested time like it was a currency my 24-year-old self had hidden under the floorboards. 2 mornings a week, 1 afternoon a month, a late-night call when a feature was about to ship and someone's hand shook. I didn't need to be the hero. I needed to be the adult in the room who remembered what the room felt like when it was cold. My mother, when I told her about the vote, said, "Be kind to yourself about the pleasure you feel. You did a hard thing and you did it cleanly. Joy is not a crime." I thought about that when the first quarterly numbers rolled in and churn had slowed just enough to make the graph stop looking like an execution. I thought about it when Priya called me at midnight to say, "We kept our 3 biggest accounts." I thought about it when I saw Avery's LinkedIn update 6 weeks after the meeting. Sabbatical. I typed a message and then erased it. I typed another. If you ever want to talk, I can be a person who knows what it is to be publicly humbled. I sent it. She saw it and said nothing, which is also a kind of grace. Matchstick, meanwhile, grew the way slowly things do when you keep them fed and stop staring at them like they owe you something. We hired a proper head of engineering and gave Marcos a team. We gave Zoya a seat at the table where decisions about features were made, and not just the place where they were painted. We added a feature that seemed trivial until it quietly reduced one tiny category of errors by 40%. A photo that popped up to remind a driver what a properly secured pallet looked like in the dim light of 4 a.m. We added another that felt like magic, because it wasn't. A nudge to re-enter a weight if the numbers smelled like a wrong decimal point. We were improbably profitable. An older company offered to acquire us. The number wasn't obscene, but it was opaque in a way that made me bring in people who saw through opacity. We negotiated. We walked away once, and then walked back when they corrected their own arrogance. We sold, and I sat on the floor of my apartment the night it closed and stared at my hands as if they had done something mysterious and holy just by typing and signing. When the wire hit, I bought my mother a house with a porch and a kitchen big enough to dance in while the rice steamed. I paid Zoya and Marcos more than I had imagined I would ever be able to pay anyone as more than a paycheck. Gratitude turned into rooms lit by electricity. I put the rest into 2 things. An index fund my financial advisor called Boring, with reverence, and a small pool of money I labeled privately Girlhood Revenge. It wasn't revenge. It was the opposite. It was investment in people who had been told by rooms with oak tables that they were not ready yet. I wrote checks to founders who reminded me of myself, and to founders who didn't, because sameness is a trap dressed as solidarity. I learned what it felt like to be on the other side of the table, watching someone pitch you the thing they had made from sleeplessness and sugar. It felt like being handed a match and the responsibility to decide where to light it. A year after the Halberd vote, I walked into their office for a board meeting that didn't feel like an unanesthetized root canal. The whiteboard stain had been scrubbed into the shape of an unrecognizable country. The charts were less ugly. They had color that meant something. Ishan presented the new driver flow. It had 3 screens. The first told the driver what he had to do. The second let him do it. The third celebrated the fact that he had done it with a big green check mark that didn't insult his intelligence. When he finished, the room did not clap. We were not a clapping kind of board. But the silence was not skepticism. It was relief. After the meeting, I went to the break room where the coffee was still bad, but the mugs were new. Nadia was there, hair shorter, smile the same. "So," she said, leaning against the counter. "You actually did it." "It is in progress," I said, because the worst thing founders do is believe their verbs can be past tense while the world is still moving. "But yeah, we started." Nadia tilted her head. "How does it feel?" "Like being right about a thing I didn't want to be right about," I said. Then I laughed, the kind of laugh that tastes like relief. "And like getting to be a grown-up." She clinked her mug against mine. "To grown-ups," she said. "And to matchsticks." On my way out, I stopped at the front desk. There was a plant there that looked like it missed sunlight. I touched its leaf and thought, not everything thrives under fluorescent lights. I thought, sometimes you have to take yourself outside and let the wind tell you what you're made of. Outside, the city was in one of its days that make you forgive it everything. I walked along the river, past tourists who believed in boat tours and workers who believed in late lunches. I thought about the younger version of myself who had sat in that office reading an email that rewrote her job into a smaller shape. I wanted to send her a message across time. This hurt will become a door. The room on the other side has windows. Months later, I ran into Avery of all places at a bookstore that smelled like paper the way some churches smell like candles. She was looking at a shelf of books with titles about product management that sounded like self-help and doom. "Hi," I said, because I am a person who believes in ghosts and closure. She turned. For a second she didn't place me. Then she did, and every emotion skittered across her face like light through blinds. She exhaled, a sound like surrender. "I saw your message," she said. I didn't know what to say. "You didn't have to say anything." "I was bad at my job," she said. "I thought it would be fun to be important. It wasn't fun. It was like being asked to perform a dance you've only ever seen on YouTube in front of 1,000 people. But you still fired me." "I did," I said. "Because it was my job, and because the job was not being done." We stood there among the spines. She picked up a book and put it down. "I've been taking classes," she said, a note of almost defiance in it, and my heart did an inconvenient happy flip for a person I was supposed to dislike. "I'm working on an app for my friend's floral business. Scheduling, inventory, customer messaging. Small. I like it." "Build it," I said. "Make it simple. Make it useful. Do not pick teal." She laughed, a real laugh. "Noted. If you want feedback," I said. "I mean it. Send it my way." "I might," she said, then paused. "Do you ever feel like you were put in someone's path to be their villain?" "I feel like most of us are someone's villain and someone else's angel," I said. "If we're lucky, we get to be our own." She smiled at that, small but true. We parted. The air outside had that bite that hints at snow. I pulled my coat around me and felt something heal in a place I hadn't realized was still bruised. That winter, Halberd secured a customer that had once been a punchline in our office. Too big, too stubborn, too wedded to clipboards. They came because Priya had talked to their floor managers at 6 in the morning instead of their executives at 11. They came because Ishan's 3 screens worked. They stayed because when something broke, it was fixed in hours, not quarters. At a board dinner after the deal signed, we ordered champagne and the kind of desserts that arrive in small bowls like jewels. Priya raised her glass and said, "To remembering instead of forgetting. To choices that feel like clean sheets. To matchsticks that light, not burn." Everyone laughed. I thought of my mother's duvet metaphor and smiled into the rim of my glass. We toasted, and for once I let the moment feel uncomplicated. I am not the hero of this story. I am the person who was underestimated 1,000 small times and decided to convert that underestimation into a currency that spends like wisdom. I am the girl who was replaced by a niece and became the investor who fired them both. But I am also the person who sends bagels after a bug, the person who writes a clause that protects the future from the past, the person who leans over a whiteboard and draws 3 boxes and says, "Honestly, this is enough." If there is a moral, it is this: the cruelest thing you can do with power is hoard it, and the kindest is to use it to make other people's Tuesday afternoons less brutal. Invest in that. Fund it until the graphs look like kindness. On the anniversary of the day I left Halberd, I went back to the co-working space where Matchstick had been born among sticky tables and dreams that tasted like lukewarm coffee. The poster about Hustle Harder was still there, and I wanted to tape a post-it under it that said, "And nap." I sat at the table where we had argued about whether the button should be on the left or the right, and whether to call it send or nudge. We chose nudge, and I stand by it like a tattoo. I opened my laptop and wrote an email to Dave, our first customer. Subject: still grateful. I told him that we'd sold the company, but his lifetime discount still stood, and I still read every one of his one-sentence emails, and sometimes printed them out, because they felt like the world's most honest focus group. He replied 5 minutes later. "Tell your mom I said thanks too. Without her I don't think you'd have done it." I forwarded it to my mother, adding, "He says thank you." She called me immediately and said, "He is a wise man. Did you eat lunch?" I had not. I closed the laptop. I walked outside into a city that had, despite everything, kept moving. I bought a cinnamon roll the size of my former doubts. I ate it sitting on a bench that faced a tree that had more birds in it than any tree that size should legally have. Life was not fair and did not owe me narrative completion. But it had, without being asked, given me a story that did not end at Nebraska-shaped stains. When I got home that night, I wrote a list on a piece of paper torn from a notebook. Learn to sleep after big days. Keep a no-till rule in everything but the ocean. Hire people who know where the bodies are buried. Aim for 3 screens, not 20. Send bagels. Remember, Tuesday is someone's whole world. I pinned it to my fridge. I stood back. I thought about the matchstick I had struck 2 years ago, and how it had lit not a bonfire but a series of candles, enough to see by, enough to lead yourself and a few others out of a room that deserved more light. If you had told me that the girl who was demoted by email would one day sit at a table and calmly vote to fire the people who had moved her aside, I would have asked what medication you were on and whether I could have some. But here we are. In the end, it wasn't about vengeance. It was about stewardship. It was about a company that could be better and the people who would make it so, and the young woman who had the proof in her bones and in her bank account that we are allowed to rewrite the stories that do not fit. On my way to bed, I looked at my hands again, a habit I had not lost. They looked ordinary, wrinkled at the knuckles, a line of ink where a pen had leaked. I thought, these hands wrote an email, built an app, signed a term sheet, poured coffee for a driver who had done 12 hours on a highway that forgot it was flat. They are not magic. They are sufficient. I turned off the light. The room went dark in the friendly way of rooms that remember you. The city outside kept humming, like a giant server with perfect uptime. I slept, duvets made of money and work and love layered above me, and dreamed not of teal but of maps of places we hadn't fixed yet, and a small, bright flame that was not there to burn anything down, only to show us the way. The end.